ShadowDirector, Dissecting the DSM, Episode 8, What You Were Worth. He was held for 10 days. 10 days of intake, assessment, medication, monitoring, documentation. 10 days of being processed, coded, billed. And when he requested his medical records, when he saw the billing statements, when he researched the reimbursement rates, he discovered something that changed everything. He wasn't a patient. He was a revenue stream. Welcome to ShadowDirector, Dissecting the DSM. In our previous episodes, we explored how the DSM fragments experience into codes, how F31.9 became a profit center, how the system codes but doesn't treat, what it feels like to be sedated and documented, and how ECO and TDO processes shell shock. Today we're going into the numbers, the actual dollar amounts, the real financial value of a patient in the ECO TDO pipeline, and how the system profits from each admission. Let's start with the base rate. Virginia Medicaid pays approximately $1,000 to $1,200 per inpatient psychiatric day. He was held for 10 days. That's $12,000 in base revenue, just for the bed, just for the basic care, just for being there. But that's only the beginning. If he had private insurance in addition to Medicaid, the facility could bill both. Private insurers reimburse approximately $1,800 to $2,200 per psychiatric day. For 10 days, that's $18,000 to $22,000. If the facility billed both Medicaid and private insurance for the same confinement, a practice known as double billing, that's $30,000 or more for the same 10 days. The same patient, the same stay, billed twice. During the COVID-19 pandemic, hospitals received additional payments for overflow psychiatric beds. The CARES Act Provider Relief Fund provided $500 to $800 per day for boarding and overflow psych patients. His ECO hold, which included approximately 8 hours at one facility, plus an overnight transfer to another, likely qualified at both facilities. That's an additional $4,000 to $6,000 in COVID relief payments on top of the base reimbursement. Then there's the diagnosis, upcoding. F31.9, unspecified bipolar disorder, reimburses 20 to 25% more than codes for depression or PTSD. According to Milliman Reports and Department of Justice settlements with HCA Healthcare, Psych DRG 885, which includes bipolar diagnoses, generates significantly higher reimbursements than depression DRGs. For a 10-day stay, the upcoding adds $5,000 to $7,500 to the episode value. Let's add it up. Base Medicaid reimbursement, $12,000. Private insurance overlap, if applicable, $18,000 to $22,000. COVID relief add-ons, $4,000 to $6,000. Diagnosis upcoding premium, $5,000 to $7,500. Total direct episode value, $35,000 to $40,000. For 10 days, for one admission. For one person processed through the ECO/TDO pipeline. But here's where it gets really disturbing. This isn't just about one admission. This is about lifetime value. Once labeled with F31.9, once documented as having bipolar disorder, the person becomes permanently eligible for Medicaid and Medicare disability benefits. According to research published in JAMA Psychiatry and Psychiatric Services, bipolar patients have a 40 to 60% rehospitalization rate within 2 years. Over 20 to 30 years, a patient might have 10 to 15 admissions. Each admission generates $35,000 to $40,000 in revenue. Over a lifetime, that's $200,000 to $400,000 in total billings. HCA Healthcare, one of the largest hospital systems in the country, describes behavioral health in their annual reports as a stable, high-margin growth segment. Private equity analysis confirms this. Psychiatric disability patients generate $200,000 to $400,000 in lifetime billings. The system doesn't just profit from one admission, it profits from creating a permanent patient, a lifetime revenue stream, a person who will cycle through the system again and again. The ECO/TDO pipeline is particularly profitable because it creates involuntary patients. They can't leave, they can't refuse treatment, they can't challenge the billing. They're held until the system decides to discharge them, and the system has financial incentives to keep them longer. The longer they stay, the more revenue. The more revenue, the more profit. The mystery isn't why the system doesn't treat. The mystery is why we thought it would. The system is designed for revenue, not recovery. The incentives reward coding, not care. The structures prioritize billing, not healing. When you understand the numbers, when you see the financial value of each patient, when you recognize the lifetime revenue streams, the system's behavior makes sense. It's not broken. It's working exactly as designed. But here's what happened next. Something the system didn't expect. He was discharged with his code, his medications, his follow-up appointment. He was supposed to return to the cycle, ECO, TDO, intake, coding, billing, discharge, return. The machinery expected him back. The revenue projections assumed he would return. But on the unit, in those 10 days, he had met others. Not just fellow patients, fellow survivors, fellow observers, people who had also begun to see through the codes to the system beneath. There was someone whose terror performed as mania, someone whose depression looked like elevated energy because stillness had never been safe, someone who had learned to survive by becoming the life of the party when dying inside. The system saw bipolar. The person knew this is survival, not disorder. There was someone whose strategic coldness was coded as emotional instability. A woman whose calculated performance of borderline symptoms was exactly what the clinicians expected from a female patient. If she had been male, the same presentation would have been called antisocial. But she was female, so she was borderline. She knew the game and played it perfectly. There was someone who saw patterns, connections between ancient texts and modern systems, between mythological frameworks and psychiatric structures, between historical trauma and present-day targeting. The clinicians called this grandiose delusion. He called it seeing clearly for the first time. These people, these fellow survivors, these fellow seers, they changed something. In the molasses of the unit, in the shell shock of the intake, in the chemical fog of the medications, something else was forming. Not compliance, not acceptance, awareness. The protagonist, the one we followed through 7 episodes, through 4 intakes, through the injection at 3:15, through the codes and the billing, and the revelation of his financial value. He wasn't alone anymore. He had found others who saw what he saw, who understood what he understood, who knew that the code was not identity, that the diagnosis was not truth, that the system was designed to profit, not to heal. This is where the story shifts, from exposing the problem to understanding the transformation, from nigredo, the blackening, the descent into the molasses, to albedo, the whitening, the beginning of illumination. In the alchemical tradition, transformation requires 3 stages. First, the dissolution of the old form. That's what the system did, dissolved his identity into codes, his experience into symptoms, his humanity into billing. But dissolution is also the beginning of transformation. In the molasses, in the darkness, something new becomes possible. Second, the separation of elements. What is real? What is imposed? What is the self beneath the code? In the unit, surrounded by others who were also beginning to see, these questions became possible. The code is not identity. The diagnosis is not truth. The self exists before and beneath the system's categories. Third, the integration. Taking what was separated, the trauma and the resilience, the survival and the truth, the shadow and the self, and combining them into something new, something the system never intended, something that doesn't just escape the cycle but transforms it. The protagonist is beginning this journey, and he's not alone. Others are walking it too. Others who were coded, billed, documented, but who saw through the documentation to the truth beneath. The next phase of ShadowDirector will follow this transformation. We'll meet the others, the ones whose presentations were inverted, whose genders shaped their codes, whose pattern recognition was pathologized. We'll explore the alchemy that transforms lead into gold, that takes the material the system tried to process and transmutes it into something the system can't contain. The numbers are real. 35 to 40,000 per admission, 200 to 400,000 over a lifetime. The system profits from each person it processes. But the numbers don't have to be destiny. Understanding them is the first step towards something else. Thank you for joining us through this first arc of ShadowDirector. The mystery of the codes has been revealed. The financial machinery has been exposed. The human cost has been documented. But documentation isn't the end. It's the beginning. In our next episode, we meet Marcus, someone whose terror performs as mania, whose genius is coded as disorder, whose histrionic survival masks depths the system never saw. His story, and the stories of others like him, will show us what happens when the coded become the coders, when the processed become the transformers, when the lead remembers it was always gold. Until next time, remember, you're not just a patient, you're not just a revenue stream, you're not just a code, you're the prima materia, the raw material of transformation, and the alchemy is just beginning.